Shana Tova. So, along with my hazel eyes and dark curly hair, my parents bequeathed me another notable characteristic, and that is worry. I am an Olympic worrier. Of course, I couldn't compete with my father. He for sure would have been the gold medalist, so maybe I would take a bronze in the sport. I'm the kind of person who has an uneasy feeling when there's nothing to worry about, because then I'm worried that there must be something I'm forgetting to worry about. And believe me, I know I'm not alone. That's why there's all these WebMD sites that people spend hours on, Googling symptoms and dwelling on bad news statistics. This past year, I had plenty of worries to keep me busy. Our oldest daughter, Hannah, was spending a semester in South Africa doing a community health program and living in a Zulu village. And on her very first day in the clinic, a baby with AIDS died on the examining table. You know, South Africa is the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic, and it's one of the most violent, if not the most violent countries in the world. And to top it all off, in her spare time, she had to go cliff diving and tell me about it. Oi. Some of us worry more than others, but I know that all of us have fears, rational fears, irrational fears. The fear of losing a job or a spouse, the fear of rejection or failure, plane crashes, car crashes, dog bites, terrorism, the economy, public speaking, failure, our children's health, our parents' health. The list goes on and is distressingly endless. I recently read an email that I want to share with you called How to Stay Safe in the World Today. Here is some of the advice. Avoid riding in automobiles because they are responsible for 20% of all accidents. Do not stay at home because 17% of all accidents occur at home. Avoid walking on sidewalks or streets because 14% of all accidents occur to pedestrians. Avoid traveling by air, trains, bus. 18% of accidents involve these forms of transportation. Of the remaining 33%, 32% of fatalities occur in hospitals. So above all, avoid going to the hospital. You will be pleased to learn that only 1/100th of a percent of fatalities occur in synagogue. And these are usually related to some previously existing condition. And by the way, Torah study is even safer because the number of people who perish in Torah study is too small to even be measured. So therefore, logic tells us that the safest place to be at any given time is right here. So congratulations, you're in the right place. But, you know, truly, as last month's attack on the Sikh mosque taught us, there is no place or time that is truly safe. We are humans. We're fragile and finite, and we live in an erratic, arbitrary world. So what are we to do? How do we handle the fact that we're not always in control of what happens to us? How can we find a place of security and calm despite the monsters lurking under our beds at night? The great philosopher Martin Buber once said, "Behind every prediction of disaster lies a concealed alternative." So, What is the alternative to worry or fear, and how are we to find it? This summer, I heard an interview with Barry Sonnenfeld, who's the director of the Men in Black movies. And being a nice Jewish boy from New York, it was surprising to learn that he directs his movies wearing a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, sitting on a saddle that's placed on an apple box with wheels to give it more authenticity. So Peter Sagal, who was interviewing Sonnenfeld, asked him about the movie Wild Wild West, which he also directed, and what it was like to direct a movie that actually had real horses on the set. And Sonnenfeld said to him, well, actually, I personally avoided the horses. He said, you don't want to go near horses. They are really scary. And so Sagal said to him, so let me get this straight. You dress like a cowboy, you wear cowboy boots every day, you direct your movies from the seat of a saddle, and you're scared of horses? And Sonnenfeld said, yes. So Sagal said, so you direct these movies out of a sense of fear and anxiety? And Sonnenfeld said, you know, it's funny you should say that, because my motto in life is live in fear. And Sagal said to him, so how does that work out for you? And Sonnenfeld said, it's great, because I'm never disappointed. So Sonnenfeld lives in fear, waiting for the worst to happen. And at the same time, he actually sits on it. He sits on his fear and rides it every single day. He may not go near real horses, but he gallops on a facsimile of what scares him the most. This past year, our world lost a wise and wonderful children's author, Maurice Sendak, who's most famous for the book Where the Wild Things Are. Now, children and adults all love this book for its scary monsters that roar their terrible roars and gnash their terrible teeth. And also because we fall in love with the little boy Max, who triumphs over the monsters and finds a way to make it home in time for his still warm dinner. Many people don't know how real Sendak's monsters were for him. You know, he was the child of Jewish immigrants who lost most of their family during the Holocaust, and they constantly reminded Sendak how he would have many more cousins if it hadn't been that they'd all died. He viewed his childhood not as a place of safety, but a place of untold demons. Demons who became characters he confronted in his stories. Sendak's creatures gave him and all of us a chance to look at the monsters that live outside of us so that we could confront the monsters that live inside of us. He named his fears and then he transformed them into beasts, beasts that could be tamed. Behind every prediction of disaster lies a concealed alternative, claimed Buber. So perhaps one way to reveal fear's alternative is to do as Sonnenfeld and Sendak, and not avoid, but actually confront our deepest fears, those things that keep us up at night, name them, stare into their little yellow monster eyes, or saddle them up and ride. Yesterday, as part of our Rosh Hashanah experience, we read the scariest Torah portion of them all. The one where God tells Abraham to do the most terrifying and unthinkable thing a parent could ever do: murder his own child. We read this story and are kind of shocked, not only at God's grisly request, but at Abraham's compliance. He should have been paralyzed with fear, but he wasn't. And in clear, methodical detail, the Torah tells us that Abraham rose in the morning, saddled his ass, split the wood for the burnt offering, and set out with his son Isaac. We all struggle with this story. On the one hand, we could be horrified by Abraham's lack of compassion and his blind obedience to God. But on the other hand, there is perhaps a hidden message in this story. For what was it that gave Abraham the courage to get out of bed that morning and put one foot in front of the other? I want to believe it was faith, not a blind faith in God, who was telling him to do the unthinkable thing, but faith that God in the end would take care of him and Isaac too. In this story, Abraham listens to God, but he hears something even deeper. He hears a voice inside of himself, a voice telling him to trust God, to move forward into the unknown, not knowing what would lay ahead, but believing that it would turn out all right. And that's the essence of the story to me. Behind every prediction of disaster lies a concealed alternative. For Sonnenberg and Sendak, it was naming their fears and confronting them head on. For Abraham, it was faith. Faith in himself, faith in God, and faith in tomorrow. The story of Abraham reveals even something more, because rather than being incapacitated by his fear, strung out, panicked, Abraham's confidence and courage builds with every step that he takes. I recently read another story about a modern-day trial in which a young woman named Bridget conquers her fears through action. So this story appeared in the New York Times wedding section, which you all know I love to read, and it was written by her father on the occasion of his daughter's marriage. As he gazed upon her looking so beautiful and strong on her wedding day, he was remembering 10 years earlier when she lay bleeding in a field. As she was getting home one night, a man kicked down her door, robbed her, abducted her, took her away to a secluded field, and assaulted her in the worst way possible, shot her 3 times in the back, and left her to die. And miraculously, she didn't. Bridget lived, and she reported the attack, and she actually returned to that field where she was assaulted to make a video for a public awareness campaign. And she began to speak at anti-violence rallies and sexual assault conferences to communicate that there is no shame in what happened to her and should be no stigma attached to her or victims like her. She's now a volunteer for sexual assault and violence programs, and she sits with survivors in hospital emergency rooms, holding their hand, listening to them, and letting them lean on her in their staggering grief. Behind every prediction of disaster lies a concealed alternative. Bridget lived the disaster. In fact, what happened to her was probably worse than anything she could have ever possibly imagined or feared. Yet she didn't allow her fear to strangle her. In fact, she did what I think is the most counterintuitive thing she could have possibly done, because instead of build walls around her heart and harden herself, She actually made herself more vulnerable by opening her heart and offering it to others. Her father reflects, 10 years ago, bleeding and alone in a field where she had been left to die at 24, my daughter got up and stumbled to a house in the dead of the night. She later said she felt as if she had been lifted by God. I asked her, somewhat bitterly, where God had been 10 minutes earlier. In the greatest testament of faith I have ever heard, she calmly replied, "He was there, holding my hand." What enabled Bridget to rally, to respond the way she did? It was her faith. It was her faith that no matter what happened to her, God was with her, holding her hand. As Bridget learned far too harshly, there is no physical place that is truly secure in our lives, and nothing we can do to guarantee our safety. But what we can work for and hope for is a place of inner security, a place of bitachon, as it's called, trust in Hebrew. I wish I could say it's as easy as Bobby McFerrin suggests, don't worry, be happy. But developing that sense of inner security requires work, cultivation, practice. We grow it through investing in ourselves, in prayer, exercise, yoga, meditation, whatever healthy practice you have that helps you to calm your frenzied heart. And then, my friends, we have to move beyond ourselves and invest in others through love, giving, friendship. You know, it's true that fear and worry can be terribly self-absorbing. So we have to turn inward to reflect and face the truth of our lives. But then we have to move outside of ourselves and get busy. In her book, Kitchen Table Wisdom, Rachel Remen tells a story about a little girl who'd been taught that God watches over us. So under the protective attention of God, this girl felt wonderful. She grew, she flourished, she didn't worry. But she did have this secret fear. She wondered what would happen if God blinked. And she began to dwell on this and really worry. And she confided in her loving grandfather. And her grandfather reassured her with these words. He asked her, if you woke up in the night in your room, would you know that your parents are in the house? Yes, she responded. How would you know? Her grandfather asked. Could you see them, hear them, touch them when you were laying in your bed? No, the little girl responded. I would just know that I was not alone in the house. We too don't need to see God to know that we're not alone in the house. We just know, and from that knowledge, we find comfort and strength, the comfort and strength to live fully with hearts open to love, and yes, also to heartbreak. Indeed, as our High Holy Day liturgy so vividly reminds us, we are all vulnerable to life's vicissitudes, and none of us knows what the future holds, and there's plenty to be afraid of. If we let them, our fears can trap us in a narrow box of false safety where we never fall in love or travel or ride a horse, or form deep relationships, or let our children out of the house. Our fears can corner us in unhealthy relationships, stale careers, and worn-out routines. But what kind of life is that? A life without risk of failure or heartbreak or defeat is a life where the soul lays fallow. Living a full and vital life requires facing our fears and finding faith. Faith in ourselves, that somehow, no matter what happens to us, we will find a way to make a good life. Faith in others, that people will be there for us to help us through the darkest times. And finally, a faith in God, that we are cradled in God's love and support, which will sustain us in the darkest night. This kind of faith cannot be defined by logic or words or intellect. It is an attribute of trust that comes from within. The ancient rabbis tell us a stirring story about Adam's first day on earth. Having lived only one day, he had never experienced darkness or night. So when that first night came, Adam was terrified. He thought there might never be life again, never another day of light, never anything to look forward to hope for, to see. But he believed that there would be something more. And so he picked up these two rocks. One of them is called Alepha, darkness, and the other is called Mavet, death. And he took those two rocks and he rubbed them together until he created a spark. And that spark illuminated the darkness until inexplicably the sun rose and there was another day. So this story teaches us that our primal fears date all the way back to the very beginning of time. On the first day of life, Adam worried there wouldn't be another day. But the story also teaches us that faith and fortitude also date back to that very beginning of time. From fear and shadows, the stones of darkness and death, Adam created hope and light. Because to be fully human is to stand before death, but not allow it to undermine our lives. We too hold those stones of death and darkness in our hands. There's no escaping them. But our gift from God is that it's possible for us to take those stones and from them to create a spark of light. Behind every prediction of disaster lies a concealed alternative. That alternative is life, moving forward, making it matter, even as we wrestle with our demons. May we, each of us, embrace the universe of possibility and promise on this new day, this Rosh Hashanah, this new year. Amen.